There are moments in life when one decision doesn't just change a situation, it defines who you are. Your Honor, if I had waited, he wouldn't be alive right now. The courtroom didn't just go quiet, it froze. Not the kind of silence you hear, the kind you feel in your chest. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. The woman standing there wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even shaking anymore. But her eyes told a story no legal argument ever could. 30 years in intensive care. 30 years of watching people fight for one more breath. 30 years of seeing the line between life and death, from closer than most people could ever imagine. And today, she stood here as a criminal. Not for harming someone, not for stealing, not for negligence, but for doing something far more dangerous in a system like this. She chose a human life over a rule. My name is Judge Frank Caprio, and I have sat on this bench long enough to recognize patterns. I've seen people lie with confidence. I've seen desperation disguised as innocence. I've seen stories designed to manipulate outcomes. But what I saw that day was different, because this wasn't a story trying to escape the law. This was a story challenging it, and what unfolded inside that courtroom didn't just question a decision, it questioned the system itself. Before we go any further, I want you to do something. If you truly believe that a human life should come before any rule, any protocol, any system, type the word life in the comments, not for the algorithm, but because deep down, you already know the answer. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday morning. Routine cases, routine decisions, routine outcomes, until case number 2026 Med 0912 was called, and suddenly, nothing about that room felt routine anymore. The gallery wasn't filled with strangers, it was filled with nurses, dozens of them. Some in scrubs straight from overnight shifts, others in plain clothes, but all of them standing, silent, watching, not out of curiosity, but out of solidarity. That alone told me everything. This wasn't just her case, this was their reality. And then she walked in, Elena Vance, 52 years old, ICU nurse, 30 years of service, no prior record, no disciplinary actions, no history of misconduct, just a woman with tired eyes, and the kind of quiet strength you don't learn, you earn. She wore a simple black dress, no attempt to impress, no attempt to perform, because she wasn't here to win, she was here to tell the truth. To my right stood the hospital's legal team, 3 men, sharp suits, perfect posture, calculated expressions, the kind of people trained not just to defend a system, but to protect it at any cost. The charge was simple on paper: unauthorized administration of a controlled substance. But what it really meant was this: she acted when she was told not to. I leaned forward. Ms. Vance, you knowingly bypassed a direct medical order. You violated hospital protocol. You risked your license, your career, and potentially your freedom. I paused. Do you understand the seriousness of these charges? She didn't hesitate. I do, Your Honor. And then she said something that changed everything. But the hospital was looking at a chart, and I was looking at a man who was dying. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a normal case, because this wasn't about rules. It was about something deeper, something systems struggle to process: human judgment, human instinct, human responsibility. The prosecutor stood immediately. Your Honor, this is not about emotions. This is about protocol. Ms. Vance is not a physician. She is not authorized to make independent medical decisions. Her role is to follow the chain of command, a clean argument, structured, safe. But reality? Reality doesn't always follow structure. And sometimes, following the system blindly is exactly what costs a life. I turned back to Elena. Tell me what happened that night. She took a slow breath, and in that moment, she wasn't a defendant anymore. She was a nurse again, standing in that ICU. There was a patient, Mr. Harrison, 74 years old. Her voice softened. He wasn't just a number on a screen. He had a family, grandkids, stories. He loved jazz music, played it every evening when his wife visited. The courtroom leaned in, because now this wasn't abstract. This was real. His oxygen levels started dropping, fast, critically fast. The protocol required authorization from a specialist before administering the medication. And where was the specialist? I asked. She paused. In a board meeting, discussing budget allocations. That sentence hit the room like a shock wave. A man was dying, and the decision maker was in a meeting about money. This is what people don't see, she continued. They believe hospitals are built to save lives, but sometimes they're built to manage risk. And those two things are not the same. The prosecutor tried to interrupt again. Your Honor, sit down, I said, because the truth was finally being spoken, and it needed to be heard. Elena looked directly at the hospital lawyers. You call it unauthorized access. I call it refusing to let someone die in silence. Everything shifted. Her attorney stepped forward, not with multiple files, not with overwhelming arguments, just one document, simple, but devastating. An internal report, resource allocation, budget distribution, spending priorities, millions spent on marketing campaigns, luxury renovations, image improvements. But essential cuts? Emergency oxygen supply reduced. On-call specialists decreased. Night shift coverage weakened. I looked at her. Is this what you saw? She nodded. I didn't break a rule, Your Honor. I stepped in where the system stepped back. Now this wasn't a case. This was exposure. Tell me about the moment you acted. She closed her eyes briefly. He grabbed my hand. That was it, but it was enough. He couldn't speak, but I understood. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about protocols. I was thinking about what it means to be human. I knew the cameras were watching. I knew alarms would go off. I knew I could lose everything I had built. Then she said, but I also knew if I walked away, I would never forgive myself. So she made the choice. Override code. Restricted cabinet opened. Medication administered. And then she waited. 90 seconds, 90 seconds. That determined everything. The monitor changed. The oxygen levels rose. The color returned to his face. He was alive. But while his life was being saved, hers was being taken apart. Security rushed in, not to check the patient, not to confirm the outcome, but to enforce the rule. Give us your badge. She handed it over without argument, without hesitation. I didn't need the badge to know I was a nurse, she later said. I needed to save him, to know I was still human. Silence filled the courtroom, but this time it wasn't tension, it was realization. The prosecutor stood again. This is a dangerous precedent. If every employee starts making independent decisions, the system collapses. I leaned forward. You keep talking about system failure, but from what I see, the system already failed. Then I turned to the chief of medicine. Doctor, if she had followed protocol, if she had waited, would that patient be alive today? Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Answer the question. He looked down and finally said, no. That one word ended everything. Because now, this wasn't opinion. This was fact. I turned back to Elena. Did you see him again? A small smile appeared. Yes. The next morning, he was awake, breathing on his own. He took my hand and said, I knew someone didn't give up on me. The courtroom didn't react, because it couldn't. This wasn't legal anymore. This was human. Then movement in the back, slow, careful, determined. An elderly man with a cane walking forward. Mr. Harrison. He reached the front, looked at Elena, then at me. Your Honor, if saving my life makes her a criminal, then I guess I'm evidence of the crime. Everything collapsed. Now it was time. I leaned back, looked across the room, at the lawyers, at the nurses, at the system, then at Elena. The law exists to maintain order, I began, but there is a higher law, the law of humanity. You didn't act for profit. You didn't act for recognition. You acted because someone needed you, and no one else showed up. I paused. If I punish you, I am telling every nurse to stop caring, to wait, to watch people die if paperwork isn't complete. And I refuse to be part of that. On all charges, I find you not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Relief, emotion, tears. But I wasn't finished. The real failure here is not this nurse. It is the system that put her in that position. I am recommending immediate review of hospital protocols and the creation of a humanity override policy to protect those who act in good faith when systems fail. Then I looked at her one last time. You may have lost your badge that night, but today you reminded everyone what it means to deserve one. She didn't speak, just nodded, one tear falling. And as I walked away from that courtroom, one thought stayed with me. Justice isn't always about rules. Sometimes it's about making sure those rules still have a heart. And maybe that's the part of the system we can't afford to lose.